A Theory from the Inside, Part 1. When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. John Muir. You might feel, as I sometimes do, that these episodes are like an escaped balloon, something that's come untied, flown away, happily loose from any practical application, entirely undone from down to earth. See it as it flies, escaped, the tiny spectacle lost in high winds above an earthbound city. I want to claim, though, that these apparently detached considerations lead us to a practical problem, the problem related to music theory and analysis. Let me introduce the problem through an example. I like popular music, and I like theory. A conventional, strong analysis of the Beatles song Something usually focuses on chromaticism in the song's harmonic structure. C, C major 7, C7, F. While the Beatles work through these changes, the inner voice descends chromatically, tracing the notes C, B, B flat, finally A, as we arrive at the F. The song is full of this kind of chromaticism. Also some diatonic walkdowns and novel chord choices, borrowed chords and secondary dominants. It's a great song, and certainly the chromatic movement is unarguably a part of that. The question, though, is how satisfying is the identification of internal chromaticism as an explanation for the greatness of the song, as it's sometimes presented? Here are a few observations, things that don't get said as a part of the conventional analysis. 1. There are innumerable other songs by other artists that also employ line cliches, internal chromatic lines, that are inferior by rough consensus. These songs employ the same tactic but don't have, in total, the same effect on us. 2. Identification of chromaticism, in this case, seems to work like a clever explanatory key to unlock the whole song. But there are excellent Beatles songs that contain no such obvious keys. Let It Be, for example, just doesn't have an obvious theoretical novelty that stands out or can plausibly stand in to explain the whole thing. No clever key changes, surprising signatures, modal melodies. But it's not an inferior song, just less likely to be publicly analyzed. 3. Extracting from the song the internal chromaticism itself as explanatory implies what? What does the pattern identification prove or show? Does it give the impression that really any sequence of chords, mostly diatonic, but connected via chromatic line movement, will be, for reasons unstated, mysteriously effective? But that's not really the case. These are specific chords, thus arranged. They're selected for. But the basis for effective selection is not demystified by the observation that they are connected chromatically, which makes the selection of chords that work even more difficult. Why these chords in particular to support the chromatic run? Why is this chromatic pattern effective at all? 4. Here's one question we can't treat in detail, but the conventional ask is, did the Beatles know theory? I think this question only circles a deeper issue. Whatever they did or didn't know, generally, there seems always to be an irreconcilable difference between music and analysis and the creative process itself. Are we implying by the question that even if they did know, what they did in writing was anything like what we do in analyzing? This leads on to the next point. 5. The chromatic analysis, but analysis in general, it seems to me, is really not reversible. When we analyze a work we already have, we go from composition to explanation. But what about going in the other direction, from explanation to composition? An unknown songwriter who hears a satisfying analysis of something and sits down at their piano now has another tool in their toolkit, okay. But on average, they are unlikely to write anything as good as something by using what was apparently the explanation for everything. 6. Chromaticism is, you might object, only one of many things going on in the song. I agree. We could, you might suggest, supplant our theory with, say, a melodic analysis. But more generally, we're still doing what analysis does and still getting what concepts are. It's the reduction, generalization, simplification of what is whole in experience to one or more isolated conceptual insights that is arguably the problem, rather than the solution it purports to be. We've stepped out of experience to be objective, but once we have something objective, it's unclear how we step back in meaningfully. Before the music is reduced, listeners get everything all at once. Not just all of the instruments, but the mics that were used, the studio effects pedals, the sound of the soundboard, whatever's going on, all of it all at once. Listeners also, I would add, get all of what they do and do not identify. For example, listening to a choir in a large church might cause some listeners to consider how the space affects the sound. But the effect of the space on the sound is not reserved only for those who take conscious note of it. The assumption that we need to move from our total perception in inner experience to something reduced, partial, and conceptually simplified in order to explain the wordless whole is understandable, but may itself be a problem. Where does all of this leave us? First, I think it just forces us to distinguish between intellectually satisfying explanations that do offer us something undeniable but very partial, between observations that cause us to say, yes, that must be it. It fits like a jigsaw piece. It satisfies the mind. And a real knowledge of what works and how it works and why it works, such as might be instinctively employed in writing and as we really perhaps wanted in the first place. More importantly, though, I think this think-through forces us to acknowledge something. Theory is good. It helps. It's necessary. But there really is a kind of gap. Not just a balloon in the sky gap, but a down-to-earth practical chasm between music in explaining and in experience. There's also a fairly obvious gap between how we get the songs, the creative process, and how we, to our own intellectual satisfaction, make apparent sense of what we've got once we have it in analysis. Can we understand music without first stepping outside of it and working with it as a reduced conceptual facsimile? Is there, in short, accessible to language, a theory of music from the inside?
She wears rings on her toes, under her socks, and on each ring is set a big rock. She wears a gold waist chain, but it never shows. She is worth more